next few years, while we also pay for the capacity payments, and essentially burden our people with the additional cost of these capacities. So the idea is, while we are working on IPP renegotiation to at least save a couple of rupees on the energy bill, there is another revenue of early retirement that could perhaps save even more. And these conversations need to happen nowadays if you want to, retire in like 5-10 years time. That's the lead time essentially for a good transaction to materialize. And while this is very innovative, while this is very new, there is ample opportunity for Pakistan. We feel like there's ample opportunity in Pakistan. All of my panelists kind of debate and provide different models that predict that there's ample opportunity for Pakistan. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation today. So on that note, again, thank you to my online panelists. They've been waiting for more than an hour while we enjoyed our lunch. So I'll and it's a Sunday. So again, thank you for taking out the time. I'd like to begin with you both in the interest of time. And I would like to start with Ujunwa. So Ms. Ujunwa Ojemeni is working with E3G. And E3G is pioneering or working as the lead organization on the British Energy Transition Council. So after COP26, the British government came up with a facility called the Energy Transition Council, and they've been pioneering some excellent work around preparing countries for energy transition, some innovative mechanisms and models that they've been working on across different geographies, and Pakistan is a part of this. Even our very own NPCC has sent a rapid response facility request that they're working on. So to tell us all about their work, and what is it that Pakistan could benefit from by being an active part of this council. So I would like to hand it over to Ujunwa.
Very much, Mustafa. Very good introduction. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Thanks, everyone. I'll just stop sharing for a moment, give some introductory comments, and then tell you a bit more about the Energy Transition Council. It's really great to be here to conversations happening, because we all know how important, urgent energy transition is on various levels to mitigate climate change, to secure energy for the future, and of course to unlock all sorts of economic benefits. But of course, this comes with complexities and trade-offs, including balancing some of the social, economic, and environmental factors, that come with it. We know that even when we start to talk about whether it's coal retirement, repurposing, renewables, as always, these have complexities attached to them. So it's very interesting that we're having this conversation at this time. In fact, globally, we know that some of the outcomes, for instance, of the Paris Agreement or of the past COP28, such as the tripling RE or the doubling and energy efficiency goals, all have some implications and some possibilities for some of the discussions we're having today about repurposing, early retirement, and what this can mean for even some of those goals. And so, of course, we need a coordinated approach, both globally and most importantly, regionally, to align policies, to share resources, to develop common goals, to achieve some of these objectives. So really, the Energy Transition Council really works in the center of all of this as a sort of like a global coalition of leaders from across the energy landscape, working to accelerate this shift to low carbon energy and focusing on helping countries unlock some of the barriers they face in this transition. And as you rightly mentioned, it has also been engaging with Pakistan, amongst other countries, to help understand some of the challenges it's facing, and also to help coordinate efforts of national to solve some of the challenges. Just share my screen and really just quick, go through very quick of BTC, what we're doing and some of the work we're doing in Pakistan. And I'll be happy to then take some other discussions subsequently around the just transition in the subsequent discussions. So as you can see, in fact, this slide is slightly dated, but the Energy Transition Council at this point has about 40 governments, multilateral development banks, technical partners who come together to engage globally on political, financial, and some of the technical aspects of the energy transition, ensuring that the partner countries are able to work with the international community to collaborate, find solutions that they need for their transition across various thematic areas. So the countries include 4 in Africa, but 7 in Asia, including Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan is one of the key countries facing various energy transition challenges. So it's of that list that you can see here. The other big countries in the region are also here. Also, the big donor countries, as we call them, are the countries that sort of support either financially or with some form of resources as we navigate the transition. Very importantly is the Energy Transition Council's Rapid Response Facility. And this is, I think, in my view, one of the most practical and concrete forms of how we can navigate the energy transition quickly and in an equitable way by actually supporting these countries with the practical tools and resources that they need, whether it's around the technical aspects, commercial, regulatory, whatever it is they need. So we bring together various partners, international partners from across the world, to come together and provide solutions that the countries need. And one of the key things we say that is demand-led. So we go with what the country says they need. What are your priorities? Where are the gaps? Where do you need partners to come in? And we also ensure that there's no duplication of efforts, because that's another thing. When you work with international partners, people are doing similar things. And so that coordination mechanism through some of the dialogues we have, whether it's at the ministerial level, the national dialogue level, working group levels, thematic levels, helps us to ensure that there's no duplication of efforts. These are some of the key areas that we typically focus on when we support countries. And as you can see, coal and fossil fuel transition, just transition are key aspects, including renewables, which then go hand in hand with some of the discussions around either repurposing, retirements, and how we bridge the gap in the energy transition needs. In a nutshell, this is just an overview of the RRF process. Basically, as I said, bring together spokes who can support these countries with expertise and resources. We work with the countries requesting institution to sort of shape that request in a way that it makes the most sense and is able to deliver concrete deliverables and actions. And at the end of the day, we hope that the requests that we take on actually have larger impact. So in one way or the other, either supporting the policy frameworks in the country, either being institutionalized in one way or the other, maybe being replicated across the country as well, or across regions in the country. So it's very useful that we work with the country and the spoke to frame the request in a way that it's useful and is actually meaningful for the country at the end of the day. It's a very high level overview of how we work and how requests come from the country, come to the hub. Then we go back and forth with the countries, and then a spoke or a delivery partner then takes on that request, which could be across board, whether it's technical, economic, legal, political. These are just please show some of the spokes that we work with. Some of them would be familiar with to you. And we've worked with this aspect even in Pakistan at the moment. This is just an example of how the RRF works. I will run through it. I think I've already spoken about it. How we receive requests from countries through the different dialogues and engagements we have, how we reframe it and shape it, and then how we ensure that the terms of reference are fit for purpose for that country. In terms of Pakistan, we've been working with the NPCC to support the integration of more renewables to the grid, as well as dealing with some of the challenges they face around intermittency, flexibility, and all of that. Over the past couple of months, should I say maybe over the last year, we've been engaging, and some of the activities have started in terms of training, with the HVDC Centre in Scotland supporting the NPCC team through advisory. And more recently, we've got potential additional support from other other international partners who are able to support with some form of modeling, additional capacity building, potential policy areas as well, to help them to ensure that there's additional and more consistent renewables in the grid as we go along. I won't dive into this deeply, but I'm sure in the future, as this progresses, we'll be happy to share a bit more details. I'll leave it there for now in terms of some of our interventions in globally and in Pakistan. And I'll be happy to in the next maybe round give some more practical examples of how specifically around the topic of the just transition, around co-retirement repurposing, some of the specific work we're doing, and where there's potential to replicate some of that work, who knows, maybe in Pakistan as we go along. So thank you very much, and I'll for now.
Thank you so much, Junwa, for that overview. And I think, yeah, mechanisms such as these are exactly what Pakistan requires. We've had, I think, multiple RRF requests, and this is great to know that, Pakistan is progressing with a few. And I think there's a lot of potential in terms of learning from these folks. We have a few sitting in the room, as you rightly pointed out, and there's ample interest in Pakistan as a market to develop. It's just finding those right winner proposals and projects that could essentially be scaled up and deliver the results that allow us to move forward in our energy transition journey. I'll come back to you very shortly. I'll have just one question from Matt in between. Matthew, we had Dr. Christoph with us for the larger part of the 2 days. He's just heading out to catch his flight. But we did discuss, or we got a chance to see some of the results of the work you did with, the recent study with Griffith Asia Institute. He did mention some of the key takeaways, but what we would like to know is, again, when you were analyzing the financial feasibility of early retirement for Chinese-sponsored coal-fired power projects, particularly for Pakistan, there were some surprising results given the relatively young coal fleet. And those results were about, how these plants could still be good for could be worth their money using, asset repurposing and asset evaluation. So if you could just briefly shed some light on those results, take us through your model perhaps, or what could be the lessons for Pakistan on that front.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Carpio. I head transaction advisory for Climate Smart Ventures. So maybe just to quickly introduce our firm, we are a private sector advisory firm. We're focused on transition advisory and transaction advisory. So we do transition advisory for private sector stakeholders, but also public sector stakeholders, and conversely, we help them raise money for that. Now, going back to what you were asking, now we've done a number of work already for coal retirement, and it started with our engagements with ADB. We've done reports for them, studies for them for plants, coal-fired power plants in Philippines, Pakistan, Vietnam, Indonesia, and even Kazakhstan. So we've had a good run on what we've been seeing as trends in this coal-fired power plant retirement space. We've worked on the first commercially led coal-fired power plant early retirement program in the Philippines for the 246 megawatt coal-fired power plant, which is 100% privately owned. We're working still with ADB in different functions on trying to figure out the energy transition mechanism. And as you correctly mentioned, we did also a report on China government state-owned entity owned coal-fired power plants in Pakistan and also in Vietnam. But for this conversation, we're talking about Pakistan. Now, for the study we made, I think this is aligned with the trends that we're seeing. So a lot of these early retirement transactions, in another report we co-authored, we call it with GFANS, it's called the managed phase out. A big part is hinged on optimizing debt and optimizing leverage. Now, if there's a situation where you can optimize leverage, optimize debt, lower cost, and manage returns, and then shorten the life, of the asset by doing that, that would be the secret sauce. Now, for the younger plants, I mean, ignoring first other factors like power supply and demand in the country, let's just talk about the pure dynamics of an asset. It's just basically refinancing, optimizing refinancing, and making sure that the asset has enough money to pay back the investors with the shorter amount of time. That's the entire gist of that. Now, for the study we made, we looked at the specific plants in Pakistan, and we found out, hey, if we just used a little bit more of a blended capital and also blending it with local capital, local lending, then there's a way of still doing early retirement. However, I think based on that study as well, we're realizing that the Pakistan power industry is very, very complicated. I mean, on top of the actual infrastructure needed to do the actual transition, there are a number of commercial issues that are still have to be resolved. So a lot of conclusions are towards leaning towards more on blended finance and concessionary finance to be able to provide the properly priced financing vehicles versus leaning towards commercial financing, because commercial financing might be too expensive to allow an earlier shutdown. So I think that was one of our conclusions there, and I think it's not very hard, but you just have to put more players together and get more commitments from different organizations, whether in country or outside the country. So I think that's the long and short.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think Hania will also talk about some of the plans that she's modeled and her analysis on that. But I think Ujunwa has to leave, so I'll quickly head back to you, Ujunwa. The UK just recently announced, because you do a lot of work with the UK government, obviously locally as well. You've been at the forefront of the phasing out of coal, and the UK government just recently announced the closure of its last coal-fired power plant. Something that a few years ago would have been unimaginable given the high dependency of the UK on coal power projects. But retiring early also has a very important just energy transition angle, especially when it comes to developing countries in Asia. That becomes all the more important. So how do you factor those things in terms of designing retirement, and how do you champion those causes by making sure that retirement is not only an economic decision, but also has a very dedicated just angle to it?
Thanks so much. Really appreciate coming back to that topic. And as you said, really good times we live in to see that the UK is retiring its final coal plant, and it's really exciting that we're at that point. But as you say very clearly, it's a long road for a lot of other countries, and there's a lot to consider from the just angle when we consider other countries and where they are both economically, socially, and in every aspect. So I think that the first point to start with is showing that as we consider the move from fossil fuel, of course, especially coal, the social and economic impact on the communities, the workers, the local community, and economies are at the center of any of those engagements. It's very easy to look at the economic aspect without looking at the social equity aspects, and ensuring that no one is left behind. And the people who are usually left behind, of course, are the most vulnerable, low income and indigenous communities, who have historically been marginalized, then end up further marginalized by some of these actions. So I think for us, center of the work we do, the just transition piece, is critical. It's a thread that runs through all of the other teams we talked about, but it's also good to do some work that focuses on that specific angle. And so it's been exciting to do some work in a couple of countries just around the region, in the Asian region, to be honest, around considering repurposing retirements, the just angle, and how we support countries and the communities there around this. One of the ones that I'm very excited about was, and I'm excited about this because of how it can be replicated and used across other countries and jurisdictions, and was some work we did around just transition planning and prioritization frameworks, which is really aimed at guiding countries and regions or even districts in the very, very complex decisions of retiring and repurposing of these coal plants. And the framework that came out of that work, working with partners, including Carbon Trust, who is one of our delivery partners, and Transition Zero and others in the region, are very helpful and can be then used by governments in designing their roadmaps, policies, financial instruments to ensure that as they navigate this transition, the environment, the people are protected. So in this case, frameworks that we developed in this case, Odisha State was used as a case study. A lot of it initially was secondary data, but they expect to have further engagements down the line with stakeholders on the ground for sort of to deepen and then use some of these instruments for the countries. I think why Odisha was a good example was just because of the large number of coal plants, but also the big potential for renewables in the region and the state, given that they even have a renewable energy policy. So in that case, a few things came out, I think, for me, has been critical as we encourage other countries or other regions to potentially use these frameworks and screening tools to, one, be able to plan ahead for potential retirement, repurposing, but also to be able to screen the plants that might be used or that might fit for it. I think one of the key things that came out was really for makers, and we might have some in the room, to plan really early for this retirement by putting in place the clear governance structures and financial mechanisms, as well as support for the workers. This needs to be done early. It can't just be part of an outcome of it. It has to be proactive from the inception. And I think a follow-on to that was really the need for not just top-level policies. So it's very easy to sit at the top to identify policies that are required and say, okay, we want to put in place this policy or that policy. But at the end of the day, the local level considerations are then critical, because again, if a region is so dependent on certain resources, whether it's coal mining, whether it's the coal plant, whether it's the related industries to it, what does this mean for the region, maybe regional energy security? What are the socioeconomic impacts? Are people's livelihoods and even connected communities going to change in a way that that needs to be considered from the onset? And then really, of course, the context is key. Every scenario is very different, and then tailoring it to the local context is critical. Again, I think integrating these just transition principles from day one into the planning processes, into the energy planning, and ensuring that we adapt to the needs of the region has been critical. So in that case, please, in the first instance, going forward, we hope that in that region, the principles of a just and inclusive transition will be included. So whether it's recognizing the inequalities, who is affected or not, being transparent and inclusive in the process, and then ensuring that there's an equitable distribution of costs and benefits and all of that. And then in the planning, ensuring that governance is in place, livelihoods are considered, and the communities and environment are at the forefront, and getting everyone's perspective in early, including even the plant owners, is very important. But also, not just to focus only on this. Let me give two other examples of how the just transition, considering the just transition, can be utilized in some of the work we do. In another country we worked in anticipation of potential financing for repurposing and retirement, we actually supported some work around environmental social impact assessments and detailed project reviews, because these are prerequisites, right? These are required before you can finance any retirement, repurposing, or whatever the case. So I think it's very important that international partners, whether in the room or not, are able to support some of these, should I say, project preparation efforts for some of this work we do. And I think the last example I'll give is actually one you mentioned, around how the PPAs are very important. Consider whether we can retire, repurpose. What does this mean for the community, for the plant owners, for the government, and for everyone? And one of the efforts in one of the countries we've been working with to potentially support the reviews of these PPAs. What can be done with the PPAs? It's very difficult, but can the PPAs, the coal PPAs, for instance, be converted to renewable PPAs? What does this mean for when you have to do auctions normally and things like that? So I think it's very important that we continue to provide support which relates to the transition. So whether it's in terms of the frameworks that I've mentioned, we need to put in place, or whether it's in form of project preparation in terms of preparing projects for financing of the pre-work that needs to be done, or whether it's in terms of considering how the is which are a key part of any retirement and any just angle needs to be considered. So really, I think I'll stop there. Just say it's really great having these conversations because we need the coordinated efforts of partners across board to achieve some of the things we hope for. Of course, the energy transition is urgent and complex to tackle some of the climate change issues that we have. Again, we need to consider the trade-offs in a just manner, in an equitable manner, in a fair manner, and we need to keep these dialogues ongoing and this collaboration ongoing to really ensure that at the end of the day we can say we've been equitable and just in the way that we've managed some of these transitions. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much on that, Ujunwa. Thank you again for both of your interventions, and rightly pointed out that I think that's exactly whenever Pakistan puts in an RRF, we would hope that you would consider these important factors of just energy transition, because when it comes to the region, Asia specifically, while retirement would make a lot of sense both in terms of environment and economics, the just angle often gets overlooked. So I think that's good to know that the RRF kind of factors these things in, and hopefully there's a lot of work and opportunity down the road that E3G and Pakistani counterparts can do together. So thank you so much. I believe you have to leave. Fun fact, Ujunwa was supposed to be here. She's still waiting for her visa. But hopefully whenever she gets it, we might get her into Pakistan soon. So on that note, I would like to move to our worthy panelists sitting here. We have some local examples of early retirement models as well. Hania has pioneered one of the work through Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. And some of her analysis essentially points out that while we do have a younger fleet, there are some plants ripe for retirement, and conversations for coal retirement might need to begin earlier than thought of initially. So I think that's kind of what I want to ask Hania, if she could walk us through some of her analysis, give us an idea of what could be done right now and what could the future look like in terms of planning for retirement. And feel free to use the dais if you want.
Can I be heard now? Thank you for inviting me here. I think a lot has already been said on this subject, coal retirement, the challenges. But at the risk of repetition, I do want to briefly recap why it is so challenging when we talk about retiring coal in the context of Pakistan. So, is there a clicker? Sorry. Okay, so we've heard many times over the course of these 2 days that the coal fleet is very young, and therefore it is very challenging. But why is it so challenging? So the average age of the coal fleet in Pakistan right now is 4 years. So we've got a total of 8 power plants, and around, I think, 5 of them are less than 5 years old. So that, and some of them are very, very recent. They're only a couple of years old as well. So that brings down the average age of the fleet to about 4 years. That basically means that these plants have not really paid off their debt yet. So the way these CPEC contracts are structured is that the loan tenure for these plants is around 10 years. So when these plants are young, they still have a long way to go in terms of debt repayment, and that makes the cost of retiring these plants huge. And then once these plants have retired their debt or serviced their debt, they've got high returns on equity as well. So, post debt servicing, there's a huge sum to be paid as well. We've seen that the return on equity rates for these plants range between 27 to 31%. So that amounts to a lot actually when we speak in absolute numbers, and we'll see that as well going forward. Then these PPAs, they're backed by sovereign guarantees. I will not go into that a lot because I know that has been talked about already. But that basically means that the government is liable and has ensured that it will step in and clear the dues of these plants if the off-taker, which is CPPIG, is unable to do so. And right now we see that really the government is facing some trouble, financial trouble, paying these plants off. And currently the arrears for these plants amount to about $2 billion. And they've only been growing over the recent years. I think the government stepped in and cleared some dues recently, but the numbers just keep increasing overall. So, so this is important to note because, when we're talking about retirement and a new buyer is coming in, they're going to want a clean slate. Nobody's going to be, really interested in taking these financial arrears into the system. Okay, I think that'll be better. Or maybe. My apologies for that. So when we talk about coal power plants in the China-Pakistan economic corridor, we can see that, these plants are young. Then they're generally characterized by high capacity factors. So they've really enjoyed high utilization rates because of take-or-pay agreements. The imported ones, especially, they've got a 50% minimum offtake requirement within the contracts as well. So these plants are generally characterized with having high capacity factor, high utilization rate. That means that, if we're talking about retiring them early, we have to worry about the energy security of the country. But that may not really hold true as of now. We've seen that the demand on the grid has reduced over the past couple of years, and these plants, the utilization rates of these plants have gone down as well. But so that that presents an opportunity as well, which we'll talk about later. But generally speaking, something that we hear from the government whenever we've initiated conversation around retirement is the fact that these plants are important for the country's energy security, and they're serving as base load. So that is something, that we often hear. And then, so we really wanted to see how much it would cost to retire these plants. We can see that they're sort of important for energy security. They're young. There are legal challenges as well, and economic challenges as well. So what basically are these plants worth when we talk about retirement? We did a discounted cash flow analysis just to see how much, these plants are worth, and what economic worth it has to be compensated in order for these plants to be retired. So we analyzed the China Power Hub, Port Qasim and Sahiwal, as well as the Engrothar coal power plant. And we came up with some numbers which show that retiring these plants early in an immediate scenario, that means like next year, let's say, it's going to cost us between $1.1 billion to $1.6 billion, depending on which plant we're looking at and how old the plant is. But generally, the younger the plant, the larger its economic value is going to be for retirement. So 1.1 to $1.6 billion, we do not have that kind of cash lying around. So that also presents puts a question mark on an immediate retirement scenario for these plants. And then, of course, we've got a lot of political barriers, financial barriers. Pakistan is going through an economic crisis right now. We've got a forex crunch. We've got budgetary constraints as well. So Pakistan in itself cannot really initiate a retirement program on its own. We've heard from other speakers as well. Matt talked about this as well, and then Christoph earlier on as well, that we need concessionary capital. So there's no really free money lying around for retirement as well. But most importantly, I think what's really missing from the equation right now is political buy-in from the government of Pakistan itself. We've talked a lot about retirement. We've been talking about this since 2 years. I gave a very similar presentation 2 years ago, and most of the challenges still remain the same. But what we've not really seen so far is any political buy-in from the government itself. Like, it's not going to make any difference until the government really comes up with a statement, with a political direction on retirement by itself. We've seen in the case of Indonesia, for example, Indonesia is part of the Just Energy Transition Partnership by the G7, and they're working on it very dedicatedly. They've come up with comprehensive investment plans, which is an annual document that lists down the retirement requirements, the investment that is going to be needed. So, countries which are part of these programs, they need to go in wholeheartedly into these discussions. And from Pakistan, we've not really seen anything so far. In fact, the Asian Development Bank, it initiated a study, a pre-feasibility study was done on the subject of coal retirement. But we've not really seen any progress on it on the practical front. And when you go to the ADB's website, it says that, they're still waiting for some sort of direction from the government of Pakistan itself. So we can talk all we want, but really nothing is going to happen until the government comes in with some policy direction and regulation on the subject of retirement. And then, of course, these legally speaking, these power plants, they've got legal governance in place in the form of power purchase agreements. And we've seen so far with the IPP mess that the country really is in, and then how the government has been trying to initiate a renegotiation of PPAs with these IPPs. We've seen that any attempt to do so for CPEC IPPs has really failed. The Chinese are reluctant to initiate these conversations. So I'm assuming that the same will apply to CPEC power plants as well, unless we really present them with an opportunity that benefits the investors and the sponsors for these plants. So we've talked about the challenges when it comes to coal retirement specifically. I think that within the challenges, there are some opportunities, inherent opportunities as well. So for example, we've talked about the $2 billion amount in arrears that these plants have pending towards the government. So I think that in itself is a big opportunity in order to motivate these plants towards retirement. If there's a concessional package on the table which offers a way out for these plants to recover their costs or get in new cash flows, this could be a motivating factor for plants to, for plant owners, local plant owners, as well as their Chinese sponsors, to think about retiring early. And then, like I said earlier, the grid demand, we've seen the demand on the grid has been shrinking over the past 2 years. That means that the utilization rates for these, especially the imported coal power plants, they've gone down. Yesterday, we heard Minister Lagari Saab say that these plants have less than 15% utilization right now, the 3 imported coal power plants. So when we see that the utilization rates are so low, we can say that, okay, energy security might not be that big of an issue if we go towards a retirement scenario. Maybe there are other plants that can, provide that level of power to the grid instead. And then in the last couple of years, we've seen that, there are opportunities for additional cash flow options as well on the table. So the Monetary Authority of Singapore recently came up with this concept of transition credits. So for every every ton of carbon dioxide that is retired through a coal retirement mechanism, there is a price that can be offered to the plant owners that retire. So that creates, apart from the concessional financing, the concessional loan, the blended financing that is required to initiate the retirement process, I think once the plant is operational or in the process of retirement, transition credits can offer a way out for additional cash flow. And then our friends at Climate Smart Ventures in Griffith Institute, they did a study last year which shows that retiring coal plants early and bundling that with renewable energy power plants, for example, a solar plant, that can give positive returns, and it might actually lead to an increase in the enterprise value as well. So we have models, that financial models that show that, okay, there is a bankable case for retirement as well, provided that we couple that with investment in renewable energy, and that could offer positive cash flows. And then lastly, I think timing of retirement is very important. So we've seen that immediate retirement may be out of the question because of, the almost $2 billion per plant per plant amount that is required to retire. But if we go down, if we go further into the timeline of retirement, if we see that, okay, we retire after the debt service, that means that the plant is 10 years old, we're retiring after the debt servicing is complete, we see that the numbers become much more reasonable as is expected. So we can expect between $400 million to around $630 million, which is more manageable per plant. And then if we go even further down, so let's say we're just shaving the last 10 years off of the PPA, which is a more common model that we've seen in the case of Indonesia and Philippines as well. If we're just talking about taking the last 10 years out of the PPA, we can see that it becomes even more manageable. So around $180 million per $10 million. So that sum of financing may be more easy to manage for the government or for financiers. And this is, we've got a couple of pilots as well, which are following a similar model. So nobody is really retiring right now, right away. It's going to come after a while. But it's important that we get the conversation started right away. Then, of course, there's a very clear case for environmental benefit as well that can be reaped from retirement. So we did some avoided emissions analysis as well. And if you retire, even if you retire the plant, let's say 10 years earlier than the contracted period, we can get up to 100 million tons of carbon dioxide in avoided emissions, which will benefit the environment. So, and if we apply for transition credits, we can do the math and realize, okay, there are additional positive cash flows that can be reaped out of this as well. So that I'm going to conclude my talk on coal retirement over here, and then move on to something that, may be more palatable to the government. So we realize that, in Pakistan, everything is more focused on economics. There has to be a clear economic case because, of course, we're facing a financial crunch right now. So there may be other plants that could present a low-hanging fruit in terms of retirement. So when we talk about fossil fuel-based power plants, we've got coal power plants and we've got some thermal assets as well, and which are LNG plants, which are gas plants, which are furnace oil-based plants. So within that portfolio of thermal plants, we looked at a few thermal power plants which had very low utilization rates, but was still very expensive to run. So these are LNG plants, which medium-sized LNG plants, but they have a very high cost of operation because they're running on LNG. And then they've got very low utilization rates. So basically these three plants, they're offering the grid with reactive power compensation, grid stability services, and their dispatch is very, very low throughout the year. So we looked at what it would basically take to retire these plants instead. And and okay, because of low utilization, there are other economic challenges that arise as well. So because these plants are forced to run on partial load, the government is liable to pay them partial load adjustment charges. So we calculated that for the remainder of the lifetime of these power plants, and we see that that is going to be around, the burden of that on the government is around $200 million for the 3 plants in total. And then these plants are also, because of their low dispatch, they are getting additional capacity payments as well to the tune of about $600 million over the remainder of their lifetime. So with that in mind, we looked at, what it would it take to retire these plants. And for an immediate retirement scenario, we saw that the price was just $50 million per plant. If we retire after 15 years of operation, that goes even further down to $35 million. And then if we're just looking at the last 10 years being removed out of the PPA, it becomes around $20 million. So compare that with the burden of these plants in terms of partial load adjustment charges and the capacity payments, there is a clear win-win case. So there are options for the government as well. But the government really needs to think about what it wants in terms of saving forex, and then its objectives in terms of sustainability as well. So there, we can see there's RE bundling, there's thermal plant retirement as well. But we need some clear policy direction as well as financing options as well. So I will not really go into the financing portion. I think Dr. Hassan may talk about that in his presentation. I'm just going to conclude that over here and then hand it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hania, for that. And I think it's, we've seen this presentation, a form of it a couple of years back. And the writing on the wall is there, right? And unfortunately, we can have this conversation perhaps 5 years down the lane, pretty similar to the way we are having conversations today about IPPs or capacity traps. But these essentially are power plants that just started, that are very early in their life. And every model that we see, even the government's own models, they don't see much dispatch or much utilization of these power plants. Add to it the burden of more solar coming online through distributed generation, with batteries coming as a technology and playing a role going forward. These large contractual obligations, PPAs, PLACs, will become payments that we'll have to worry about. And Pakistan is well placed to kind of start those conversations early, given our unique position in terms of climate change impacts and the young coal fleet, to monetize and mobilize our finances to avert a crisis in the making that might materialize very soon for us. Even what Hania showed in terms of the RLNG plants, retirement for some power plants makes sense right as of now. And those plants are essentially adding a lot, both for the consumers and for the government. On that note, again, I think, thank you, Hania, for that comprehensive overview. I'd like to move to Dr. Hassan Aftab. They've done similar work, but they've been focusing more on some of the financial instruments that could essentially help mobilize these early retirements. So I'd like to hand over to Dr. Hassan for his intervention.
Thank you. Before I start, I know people are slightly sleepy after eating rice. So can I get a raise of hands for people who know about finance or have read finance? Okay, and how many people have studied energy at all or energy transition? So similar people who energy and finance, and the rest have not done either of that. So I would, the reason, so what the slides I made are quite redundant because a lot of people have talked about what I was supposed to talk about. And I would not be going through the slides in the order they are in. So you just have to listen to me. Okay, so the presentation outline is basically I was going to give an overview of PRI coal plants, which I'm not going to, because if you guys were present here yesterday, you would know why Pakistan needs to transition away. And what I'm going to talk more about is why do we need to actually transition away, and what's happening in the West in OECD countries may not be applicable to Pakistan because they're financial situation is much different to ours. And it's not just a case of copy pasting what UK, Germany, or US has done to transition away. The reason which Hania has also mentioned and our speakers yesterday mentioned that, okay, our coal fleets are larger, young, it's more competitive, and there's also risk of the asset stranding. So if people have not heard of stranded assets, the idea is basically that it's not about just transitioning away from fossil fuels. It's also about how you transition and what the timing is like. Is it smooth? Is it abrupt? So because if it is abrupt, what you'll have is you'll get an economic shock. You would have other financial consequences of just retiring immediately if you do that. And Pakistan as a country has no fiscal space to do that. Not just in terms of finance, but also the socio-political system would not allow this to happen just immediately. So we also need to focus on what's the earliest exit we could potentially have. This is currently how the Chinese entities finance plants look like. And you can see that most of them are less than 10 years of age. So the key research questions are basically what are the different models? Are there financial instruments that exist? People have been talking about just transition transactions a lot, and they've been also talking about how can we support the development of potential other financial instruments. So I'm going to just talk about what's in the academic literature from a very academic point of view. And so the modeling approach basically involves the financial model is basically how we have a refinancing year. People who do not understand what refinancing is. It is basically a way where we give a subsidy or it's a carbon financing commitment to the owners, and then there's a retirement year where the plant stops operating, right? So these are two terms which I'll be using a lot in the next couple of slides. So there are two scenarios. People would have again heard about concessional finance yesterday, and it's a term which has been overly used on being a potential solution. It's basically a subsidy you can pay to debt and equity holders. And then there's cash buyout, which my colleague Hania also mentioned just now, on how the refinancing entity basically buys out the remaining debt and equity at the net present value, which is the NPV. So this is a model which basically shows on the x-axis, you have years retired early. And if you look at the y-axis, you have the buyout cost. The key takeaway from this slide basically is that cash buyout are always going to be expensive compared to if you bring out a refinancing mechanism for retiring the plant earlier. And this slide basically shows you that an interest rate subsidy has to be less than the interest rate on debt or rate of return for this to work. Otherwise, it's not financially feasible. So key takeaways are basically that the interest rate subsidies could be cheaper than buyouts to achieve the same result. Potentially, there could be debt for carbon swaps for finance, but in the case of Pakistan, I do not think that could potentially work because the carbon offset market itself is problematic, and you could have the issues which Hania was mentioning also about the avoided emissions, because avoided emissions is a term which again is wrongly taken, and people get away with just saying that, oh, these are avoided emissions, and then they finance such transitions. And Debt for carbon swaps have actually also not really shown to work. So I would not really put my money on that. In the case of Pakistan, it would require. So I think it was Junwa who mentioned how that the conversations do not have to be bilateral. It can't be unilaterally decided, and the Chinese lenders needs to be consulted in these questions in these conversations, because this cannot just happen. These are these agreements are very binding agreements. You can't just say, okay, we can't pay you back, right? Because then you'll basically go to an arbitration court and that would cost you more. So you don't want to do that. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the one novel financial instrument, which is a tiered JTT. And this is basically similar to just transition transaction, but it's tiered in the way that it encourages retirement with a key feature of being tiered. And that is basically how you have two tiers. One is a national level tier, one is a regional level tier. And again, this builds up from our conversation yesterday, that how you do need two of these. You have two of the issues which exist in case like Pakistan or other developing nations. And for national level milestones, it has to come from within the country, which could involve investment into other renewable energy capacity increases or coal power plant retirements. But regional level milestones are very important, and this could come from our neighboring countries. Again, there's someone from previous panel talking about hydropower, how if you have excess demand, you can basically export it. You can have a shared infrastructure, grid infrastructure, which could make it more and more efficient for this to work for South Asia or Southeast Asian countries. So yeah, this is basically a summary of how this could work. Reverse auction, I briefly touched on it, but a reverse auction basically means that you give compensation payment for early retirement. But for that to happen, this is how Germany did that. But Pakistan, I do not think can do that, because Pakistan does not have the fiscal space. It does not have the political environment. People in Pakistan are dependent. Laborers are dependent on the oil and gas industry. You can't do that, or there will be a sociological distress in the country. Either the government has enough money that they just pay out these people or reskill them, which we do not have. Fair enough. Securitization, again, it's a very underdeveloped bond market. I do not think anyone would do that for Pakistan. Debt for carbon swaps viable, but maybe not viable for the case of Pakistan, maybe other Southeast Asian countries, because we do not have renewable energy capacity developed, right? We are talking a lot about how, and this is from yesterday, people were saying, oh, Pakistan only has 46% of fossil fuel energy mix. What they're not talking about is that how dependent Pakistan is on that 46%. Because when that 46% gets taken away, we do not have a capacity to forgo that intermittency issue which exists. And in the energy trilemma, if people over here who raised hands for energy trilemma is the thing that you need to have intermittency taken over along with affordability and sustainability. So yeah, the other is that Pakistan is a viable candidate for tiered JTT, but that would mean that Pakistan needs to correct its ties with neighboring countries such as Iran or India to export some of this. And yeah, I would just like to thank Girish Srimali, who is the head of transition finance and helped me prepare these slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan Aftab, for that. And again, some valid points. I think this is exactly where the conversation is headed to, and kind of provide me with a good segue to move back to Matt. So fun fact, by the way, so CSV was also quite pivotal in some of the conversations. They modeled the ETM that yesterday Honorable previous State Minister Malik Amin Aslam also talked about some of the conversations of the ET, and the work was done by Climate Smart Ventures on that. And CSV has already done a transaction advisory for early retirement with the ASIN. Matt, if you could, talk about the SLTEC, so the South Luzon Thermal Energy Corporation, your experience with the early retirement. Could there be lessons for that? And also, if you could briefly talk about something that Hania mentioned, and obviously your own analysis kind of provides a good kind of it's a good analysis in the sense that Pakistan could be a good ground zero for that, and that is the repurposing. So if we talk about early retirement, but combine it with the need of Pakistan to also get some RE projects on the ground, essentially to drive down the cost of the energy mix. So could that be a possibility? Again, keeping in mind concessional finances available? Matt, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you very much for those questions. So on our experience in SLTech, so the great thing there is you have very strong proponents that really want to drive the change. I mean, in addition to you having a country where there's already a lot of policy in creating more renewable energy assets, and then the way that we helped structure the retirement was it wasn't going to happen in the next 2 years, 3 years, even 7 years. It was going to happen in like at most a 10, 12-year kind of runway. So it would really give a lot of time for the Philippine grid to really do the shift. And that's why I think it's good that you guys brought up the energy trilemma. I think a lot of key issues that hound the Pakistan power industry in relation to the energy trilemma have to be understood better, have to also be solved at least in chunks, so that it's easier for the government to buy in. Now, going back to SLTech, I think that the great thing there is you have a sponsor who was willing to like take the lead, and also he had his own set of plans that would offset his their potential loss in commercial value. But also the great thing with that sponsor is they have a good set of investor and banking relationships that was able to support that transaction. So I think to that extent, it's like a stars aligned, but of course, it's not like they just snapped their fingers and the whole thing happened. No, they really had to work for it. They really had to maximize all those banking and investor relationships. Now, if ever we were to like create a parallel comparison to like Pakistan, if ever there were sponsors, and I know that there are different kinds of sponsors in Pakistan, you have the usual international suspects there in the form of Western investors, but also Asian investors, including the China SLE. So I think the other panelists have already discussed this. If they decided to like pursue this track, they can, and with their relationships, they can, with their own investor and financing relationships, they can, and with their influence to the Pakistan government, they can drive the right kind of conversations that can prepare a transition, maybe not in 2 years' time, maybe not in 3 years' time, just to create space for the right activities to take place to ensure energy security, affordability, and also sustainability, but also just transition. So I think those were the parallelisms that they were playing with, but also that was the ASEAN experience. Now, in terms of repurposing, I think repurposing is it is very enticing to think about, but we must remember that a grid is more complex than that. Now, but also a grid is also more dynamic. Now, repurposing on a strict basis, if we decided to like repurpose on site, you can have the options of doing different kinds of technologies. If you're lucky, you have offshore wind inside. But also you have to remember, the end of the day, the enemy is not the plant. The enemy is emissions. I can create a business model where, or like, I can maximize a technology that can maximize existing assets. Like people forget, it's very expensive to to set up transmission lines and substations. And that's like a big chunk of the value of the asset. If we're able to maximize that by changing the way that the plant is run, or adding batteries or whatnot. Those are things that are already being done in other markets that are also being explored in other emerging markets like the Philippines, just to maximize the asset, but also at the same time lessen the emissions, because at the end of the day, we are in the emerging market, similar to Pakistan. The Philippines is also an emerging market. Also, the other markets that we're looking at. And I think one of the panelists also mentioned, we can't look at the developed market models and copy paste it to emerging market models, because quite frankly, we don't have the funds for that. It's a similar theme across cutting across all markets, and we must maximize these assets. But we still want to reduce emissions. That's why for me, repurposing is very interesting, because it maximizes a lot of existing assets. If we're lucky, we can do renewable energy within the same site. Of course, looks like the lowest hanging fruit there is like offshore wind, if you're lucky. But other technologies, it will be harder to replace like for like in terms of capacities and output. So that's it.
Thank you so much for that, Matthew. Again, I think a good segue to localize this conversation. Hania, so the government of Pakistan clearly understands that this is a challenge when it comes to imported coal power projects. They're already talking about conversion to from imported coal to local coal. And that is kind of an opportunity as well to, also do some analysis. Obviously, it's not going to be as simple as just changing the coal supply. There are layers of investments required to mobilize that change. And obviously, we're locking in a new power project essentially for 25 years again, kind of revising the contract, locking in again thermal generation for the longer run. Is there a conversation there to think about repurposing, or think about retiring early and putting up a renewable energy power plant instead? It could be at the same location, it could be somewhere different, but nonetheless providing some form of incentive while Pakistan struggles to do both, put on RE and get rid of coal.
Thank you, Mustafa. I think that's a very pertinent question, keeping in mind, all these conversations that are happening around conversion of imported coal, coal power plants to thermal coal right now. I think there was an article that came out today as well, where this Chinese EPC contractor was, had shown willingness to do that. But I think that is, I think that's simpler said than done. When we're talking about conversion from imported to local coal, there are a lot of technical considerations that need to be taken into place. And of course, that is going to have an added cost. So at the risk of being a little technical, I will talk a little bit about the boiler technology. So because of the low calorific value that is associated with thermal coal, we need bigger boilers in order to get the same energy output from the power plant. So we're definitely going to need boiler replacement. We're going to need bigger boilers. We're going to need a complete an expanded coal handling system, so that more volumes of coal can be processed to get the same energy output, and that is going to come with a cost of about, I think, $200 million for a 660 megawatt power plant. So if you want a megawatt for megawatt capacity replacement in terms of imported coal to thermal coal, you're going to need a hefty investment as well. The government has already done some feasibility reports on this. We're seeing that the cumulative cost of conversion is going to be around $2 to $2.5 billion for the 3 imported coal power plants. And then, of course, there are other risks. So we were talking about just transition, a cleaner energy transition. So if we're talking about converting to local coal, we're going to need, an expanded scale of mining as well. That means, more mining needs to be happening. That is going to have its own social and environmental implications. We've already seen that in the context of coal, with the existing scale of mining, there have been a lot of complications around land rights, compensation, social mobility for women, and gender gender issues as well. So all of that is going to basically increase. And then the question really arises: do we have that kind of money? Do we really need to do that, given the fact that demand has been shrinking from the national grid? There are other forms of technologies that have come into play, and by that I mean the distributed energy resources such as rooftop solar. We've seen that there's been a recent boom in the amount of rooftop solar that's installed across the country. So we've got all kinds of new technologies coming in, and we may not really need to convert to local coal. That is going to have its own costs, but I really think that the government needs to take a step back and assess really what the energy demand is going to be, and whether it can be met through other resources. And then, of course, we've got examples of repurposing existing coal power plants to rooftop solar, taking advantage of the interconnection that are already in place. These are key junctions for transmission. So if we simply repurpose the site towards rooftop solar, maybe there's opportunities over there as well, and that of course has it's cheaper when we compare costs on a levelized basis. Solar is going to be much cheaper than even a simple conversion to coal. So yeah, I'll stop there. Yeah, do you?
I just want to just add one comment on what you said of using local coal. So the cost of local coal is not just basically repurposing for a boiler, but we also need to consider the air pollution costs that could potentially come from using a low quality coal, and that is never taken into account when these cost benefit analysis are done.
That's a very reasonable thing. Yeah.
Definitely, I was going to say, of course, charcoal is of lower quality. It's going to result in more localized air pollution, even with environmental controls in place. And if you want to get the right level of environmental compliance, you're going to need added investment in environmental control, environmental compliance devices such as electrostatic precipitators, and desulfurization equipment. So it's going to be the added cost of that, and then carbon emissions are definitely going to be there, regardless of whether we have air pollution control devices in place. So yeah.
And more volume of coal because of the lower calorific bed.
And that is going to have added costs as well. So essentially, in order to get that same amount of energy output, you're going to be burning, let's say, 2 or 3 times the amount of coal that you would be burning with imported coal. So that is going to have a higher cost as well. Then again, I think there needs to be analysis on this. We need tariff calculations as well. We need to see what the real impact is going to be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Tania. I think in the we have like 7-8 minutes, and since this is a very I think novel topic, I would love to get some opinions from the room. Lots of hands already up. So if you could have someone please circulate a mic so that we can get some questions from the floor as well, and we'll try to respond to most of them. Thank you so much. Satya, if you could please assist. That gentleman, I think, was raising his hand for quite some while. The one at the front, and then Dr. Fyaz, if you may please.
I'm Sadruddin Kholo, Chief Engineer Technical Director at Northern Power Generation Company, a sole thermal power company, better. Hello. So I have some suggestions to Mr. Sania. We are discouraging coal on the environmental issues. It's very good. But in Pakistan's scenario, especially third coal, it was I will make some brief statements so that you may understand. So in early 90s, government tried to explore charcoal and convert our indigenous resources. that was thwarted due to many reasons. And now that factor has played in another way. There is no question that coal emission causes environmental damage. Yesterday, it was also pointed out, even our energy minister and people, that we are not contributor to the world so much. And the third, now you said that if we are going to replace, okay, with existing coal with charcoal, so on that efficiency we have to invest very large amount and technologically modifications, replace older boiler. But I have suggestion that if we may, if there is some 600 megawatt say on imported coal, just like Sahiwal, 660 megawatt super. So if we can expect or say that we do not generate 660 megawatt from each unit, we may go okay for 500 megawatt. So that boilers with some modification will work. What we peoples at this forum, they are very intellectual, very well versed with modern technology, modern ideas, yes. But the financial position of the country do not permit that once we install that much amount, then pay to demolish. As much as you build a new room in your house, so for that purpose, remove first for initial purpose a new room. So we have to make suggestions in that way, that which our people, our country can cater in financial and available scenario. I appreciated that you point out the three powerhouses early in the, although its emission contribution is low, 50, you say 50 million carbon or so that was great work. So by suggesting that we may convert existing.
Yeah, no, I think your
so
point
that's
is
better,
across.
That's
Yeah.
a better.
I think-
so to think over it, that we may.
Of course, I think, and
use
that's
existing
exactly
facility.
what the conversation was.
It's-
It was more
It's not
economics than
criticize
environmental.
my compliment.
Your point is well
Thank you.
respected, and if you would like to respond.
Well, I completely understand where you're coming from. I do understand your point as well. Yeah. I looked at the modification case as well that you're mentioning, that even with little technical modifications with the same boilers. But my question really is, and I think this is something that needs to be looked into as well. If we're reducing the megawatt capacity output of that plant, that means that you're going to be bringing in more, basically you're going to put more money into the modification as well. So the cost might go higher, the tariff might go higher. And I've been talking to a few experts on this as well. They're of the same opinion that if with reduced output, plant output, the tariff might be higher. So
The capacity is still there, right? The capacity payments still have to be paid. Yeah, we're not buying anything from the imported right now.
That's
The
the
imported power
point.
plants are stranded essentially. The minister yesterday kind of highlighted how less we are buying from the imported power plants.
merit
And
also.
let's not have some cross questioning. Also hear from Dr. Fiaz. Thank you. Thank you, please.
So naturally, because we have surplus capacity, so we will buy from only which is relatively cheaper. So relatively expensive plants will not be dispatched. So that further shows that we have a surplus capacity. Because the 85% capacity is sitting idle, especially for the new plants and coal plants. Even RLNG, although we had contracts, so when we did the contracts, it was like $7. Then with the distribution margin, it was not even $9, but it went up to 19, 20. With the same old contracts. So we started dispatching less. If we had, the other sources. Now who we are telling all these things, by the way? ये हम अपने आप से ही बात कर रहे हैं. Who you are trying to convince? So who are the decision makers? All these numbers, where are these, going to be presented? Who you will be convincing? No policy makers. Policy is already in place. I showed in my, although didn't get, that much time, the policy is in place. The country's policy says least cost development. That's it. Only, so these plants are already in place. So it means now they will have to be, whatever decision we make, it has to fit into under that policy. That whatever alternative solution we bring in, it cannot increase my cost. Principle decided. Now, so we are trying to strengthen countries' processes. That's why I stayed back. I didn't run away. And you are seeing that we will make it happen. Now, fortunately, you need to convince 2 institutions. No more. Number 1, NTDC. And going forward, it will be independent system operator, which will have a planning function. And it is being put in place. So as long as you convince independent system operator, which has a planning function, which will go from NTDC, that's it. The second part is then you support that planning, whatever that document we will make together, and going to the NEPRA, my dear, I'm not increasing cost, of consumers. So they will simply say, okay, I don't care. Either you generate from solar, wind, or as long as you maintain reliability, you do not increase cost. So no politician is going, as per the process, no politician is coming into the picture. That's why I presented that, process. You simply follow that process. So now I being at, at NTDC, I can facilitate that dialogue. You just need to convince those planning, whatever, and if they have deficiencies, if they have lack of understanding, they do not understand these, financial numbers, make them understand. Simple. And as long, and they will be putting up that proposal to NEPRA. This is what we are going to do. You don't need to convince anybody else.
Are you convinced? I'm saying, are you convinced? Because you're representing NTDC basically. So if we're able to convince you, I guess we have a chance.
The thing is, that is the process. So all the gadbad, what we say is due to because we never followed the process. So if there are deficiencies, let's remove those deficiencies. Let's say whatever deficiency you see in, let's say the planning function of NTDC, let's remove those deficiencies, support them through analysis, multiple meetings. I can facilitate that. And then we will convince NEPRA, the regulator.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. I'm getting
I'm Ijaz.
signals. Just last question.
Pakistan is 6th largest coal deposit holder.
Yeah.
Around 186 billion tons coal we have. And in the morning, as Federal Minister Ahsan Iqbal highlighted, that for 7 decades we have been waiting for the finances. And we have just started few coal power plants, and people have started talking of early retirement. what is the problem? Our plants are clean coal technology based plants. Unka jo SOx emission hai, NOx, unka PM, it is as per the world standard. So now we have serious affordability issues. In the morning, we see lumps also highlighted, Dr. Ali Chima, that affordability has gone around 160%. So do you have any idea what is the levelized cost of electricity from thermal coal? What is it? It is 4 to 5 cents per
Is there a
kilowatt hour.
question here? Please jump to the question. Dr. Prime.
The question
please,
is that why you are pushing for
Of
early
course. Thank you
retirement
so
of
much.
coal power plants. We have very cost-effective
Thank
power
you so much.
plants.
I think your
Textile,
question is
our
there.
textile mills
Please allow
were
for
requesting 9
response.
cents per kilowatt hour. They were not
Thank you.
granted. If we would have a good number of thermal coal power plants at 4 cents, our textile industry would
Of
not
course,
have been
I
destroyed.
totally agree with you.
Thank
I
you.
totally agree with you. Unfortunately, Pakistan missed this bandwagon. When the world was developing coal, we missed that bandwagon. The world is not financing coal anymore. And now we're talking about the world is willing to
Okay,
finance
let
RE.
me
We
propose.
also have tremendous Please allow
Let
me
me-
to respond. I listen to you. Please allow me to respond. The world has tremendous moved on to RE. There are typically many RE financing facilities available. About the large potential for wind and solar across Pakistan. I'm sure we have Senator Shaheen Rahman also online. She can talk about that. The conversation is what is best for Pakistan. And what is best for Pakistan is getting rid of stranded assets. It's about decreasing the cost of electricity for the consumer. As Dr. Saab pointed out, there's only one goal, and that is least cost electricity. And to do that, if that means Pakistan has to give up on coal because there are better alternatives available, then we have to explore those alternatives. That was exactly the point of the whole session. We had 4 different speakers talk about different models of how that could look like for Pakistan. How can we finance coal? How can we finance energy transition? And I just want this conversation to happen because essentially this is not a question of emotions. It's a question of economics. And that is
Yeah.
where the conversation is.
I think nobody's talking about, and I mentioned this in my presentation as well. We're not talking about immediate retirement. We're not saying, okay, let's retire tomorrow. Nobody's saying that. We want it to be on an economic basis. We want it to be on the least cost generation principle. No, but like, I think we need to dissociate our emotions from thermal coal. कि जो nationalism हमने उसके around build कर लिया है कि oh, coal is indigenous, it's the best way to go. Thermal coal zindabad. No, I think we need to.
It was
Really?
there for billion of years.
Yes, billions.
It will still be there.
Yes, it will
So
stay
we
there.
should not hung up on technologies. Either the thing is, who could have thought that you will have a generator sitting right on your rooftop? Like 5-10 years ago, nobody have that. So the thing is adaptation of new technologies, and we should not hung up on anything. The only thing we need to care, environment and affordability. And the 3 objectives: affordability, sustainability. You see, the thing is, and if sustain with so much, maybe technology will come up, and might have to shut down the whole business. This is, we'll go for a fusion technology. So we should not hung up on any technology as long as our prime objectives, my frequency is maintained, my electricity supply is supplied reliably. Either somebody makes at a home at 1,000 kilometers away, it should not matter.
I think Matthew, you want to come in as well. I just realized you
No,
have your
no.
hand up.
I think one thing that we have to remember is we are an emerging market, and fortunately for Pakistan, you have a very good coal resource. But we also have to remember that the world is changing. Now, we talk to IPPs all the time on a global level, and they're telling us it's harder to operate a coal-fired power plant today. Insurance doesn't exist, very expensive. Coal prices fluctuate. We're just waiting for whatever else happens on the commodity side. And then the last news that we heard is we are self-fabricating our spares for our turbines because the suppliers are gone. So unfortunately, this is the world that we are waking up to. Now, we have this opportunity to change mindsets. And one more data point is there's free money on the table. Quite frankly, there's free money on the table. International partners are willing to give very cheap money to help emerging markets to transition, whether they are a big contributor on CO2 emissions or not. They're willing to give away money. And if you're gonna ask me on a personal level, if someone's giving me money in exchange for helping me upgrade my system, whether it be my power system or my house, I'm always taking that money. It's just a question on what kinds of strings that money has. And again, that's another discussion for another day. But we have this opportunity now to do transition, to plan a transition, and as they mentioned, as the panel mentioned, it won't happen in 3 years, maybe in 10 years, 5 years. No? So very exciting times we have. That's it. Thank you. And also, that's my closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you to all of my panelists, Junwa, who had to leave early, but thank you to Hania, Dr. Hassan Aftab. I think it's been a good discussion. All we want is these conversations to happen. And I think it's high time that we don't hang up on certain technologies. As Dr. Saab rightly pointed out, the idea is to do what is best for the people of Pakistan. And what is best for the people of Pakistan is clean and green. Let's back that up with all of our might. Thank you so much. Happy to have conversations about this later. I see lots of hands, lots of nods. We can continue these conversations later, for sure.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, for moderating this wonderful session. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now it's the time for group activity. We will be having 3 groups again, like yesterday. In this specific auditorium, we are going to discuss the topic of financing RE. In the other 2 rooms, where we would be discussing, where we would have group 1, which will have the topic of MDBs, and 3rd room, which will have the topic of energy efficiency. The session has already started there, so you all are requested to join the session of your interest. Just to clarify again, we will be having financing RE group here. The group of MDBs would be in the room just across this auditorium, and the group 3, which is energy efficiency, will be in the 3rd breakout room. So we are going to start now. Remsha, she will be leading this activity, so we are going to start now. Thank you. Sorry.
I would just request everyone to come and sit in the center. We're going to have only one group here so that we can collectively form the charter of demand from our yesterday's group work. So I would just request everyone sitting on the sides to come and sit in the center so that we can start this activity. We're really behind our time schedule.
So if I can request everyone to kind of come outside who wants to be part of this group. So we are going to have one broader group who will be working on this charter of demand. Thank you. Anam.